The Interstellar Accord Academy of Combat Sciences was considered the finest martial institution in 7-star systems. Students from 17 species attended its gleaming corridors, Velhari with their four-armed grace, Sulcan with their crystalline exoskeletons, Dravani with their telepathic reflexes, all united under one roof to learn the art of controlled warfare. Then there were the humans. There was only one enrolled this semester. Her name was Lyra Vera. She sat in the back row of advanced combat theory, taking notes with a calm that most of her classmates found unsettling. She wasn't large by human standards, lean, medium height, with dark hair pulled back in a practical knot and pale gray eyes that absorbed everything and gave back nothing. She had arrived 6 weeks ago from Earth, designated a Class 7 Deathworld in Accord taxonomy, and had said very little since. Most students had looked up Earth's profile after her arrival. Most students had quietly decided not to bother her. Most students. Not all. Instructor Kale Veyron was a Dravith, a species renowned across the galaxy for their physical superiority. 7 feet tall, built like a siege engine, with carbon-reinforced musculature and a neural reaction time 3 times faster than the galactic average. He had trained soldiers for 30 years. He had broken training dummies made of compressed durasteel with his bare hands. He had a wall of commendations and a chest full of medals and an ego that had long since outgrown both. He also had a particular philosophy about training: pain was the teacher, and he was its instrument. Most species could withstand his demonstrations. A sharp strike to the shoulder, a grab and throw to illustrate leverage, a controlled impact to prove a point about footwork, standard methodology at the academy. The medical bay could handle bruising. It was, in his view, efficient pedagogy. He had never taught a human before. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was assuming the file notation Class 7 biosphere, extreme adaptation pressures, was bureaucratic exaggeration. His third, and most consequential, mistake was what happened on a Tuesday morning in Week 7. The class was practicing reaction drills. Students stood in pairs, one striking with a padded training rod, the other deflecting. Instructor Veyron moved through the room, correcting form, adjusting stances, occasionally demonstrating technique on a volunteer. He reached Lyra Vera's station. Her partner, a Sulcan named Tef, had been going easy on her. The Sulcan were a gentle species by temperament, despite their armored shells, and Tef had quietly concluded that the soft-looking human probably needed consideration. Veyron watched for a moment with visible impatience. "You," he said, gesturing at Lyra. "Come forward. I'll demonstrate the shoulder block counter." Lyra set down her training rod and stepped forward. Her expression was neutral. Her posture was relaxed, too relaxed, Veyron thought. Sloppy. She needed correction. He didn't explain what he was about to do. He never did. Anticipation, he believed, defeated the lesson. He struck her across the left shoulder with a controlled, open palm impact. The force was calibrated for species of roughly equivalent build, enough to stagger, to teach, to make the point about stance and ground contact without causing lasting harm. Lyra didn't stagger. She took the hit. Her body moved with it, a slight, practiced roll of the shoulder that dissipated the impact, and she looked up at him with those gray eyes and said nothing. Veyron blinked. He struck again, harder this time. A demonstration of the point: here is the force, this is why your feet must be planted. Lyra's feet were planted. She absorbed it. A small shift of weight, a micro-adjustment in her core, and the blow landed like it had struck something that simply did not care. The class had gone quiet. Again, Veyron said, more to himself than to her, and hit her a third time, this time a sharp, deliberate impact to the upper arm, the kind that reliably sent Dravani students to the floor and made Velhari reconsider their weekend plans. Lyra turned her head and looked at the point of impact with mild curiosity, as if checking for a smudge on her sleeve. Then she looked back at him. "Are you demonstrating impact absorption?" she asked. Or were you expecting a different result? The silence in the room was absolute. Tef the Sulcan made a sound like a kettle being switched off. What happened next would be discussed in the Academy's staff lounge for the remainder of the semester. Instructor Veyron, pride wounded and professional instinct engaged, made a decision that everyone watching would later describe as the moment it became inevitable. He reached out and grabbed Lyra by the collar of her training uniform, a controlling grip, meant to drag, meant to demonstrate takedown entry, with the full force of 30 years of trained Dravith musculature. Lyra Vera moved. Not in the way people expected humans to move. Not scrambling, not flailing, not the wide-eyed panic of someone outmatched. She moved like something that had grown up on a planet where hesitation was a cause of death. One hand came up inside his grip, broke the wrist angle, the other landed on his elbow, a leverage point that shouldn't have mattered against a Dravith's reinforced joints, except that she hit it precisely right, at the exact degree of extension, and she didn't push, she torqued, and Instructor Kale Veyron, 7 feet of carbon-reinforced galactic superiority, went sideways. He caught himself. He was trained. He recovered. She was already repositioned. He came at her again, this time fully committed, because something in him had decided this was now a real engagement, that the small human had triggered some deep professional reflex, and she didn't retreat. She sidestepped. She used his momentum. She put him into a joint lock that he hadn't encountered in 30 years of training, a technique that seemed to work on principles his body wasn't designed to resist, because it wasn't designed by his people. It was designed by a species that had spent 100,000 years fighting things bigger, faster, and more dangerous than them. And winning. He was on the floor. He wasn't hurt. She hadn't hurt him. That, somehow, was worse. The class stared. Lyra released the lock, stepped back, and straightened her training uniform. Her breathing had barely changed. "I apologize if I misread the situation," she said, and her voice was completely, infuriatingly calm. "I assumed you were escalating the demonstration." The review board convened the next morning. Instructor Veyron filed no complaint. That fact was noted by everyone on the board and discussed by no one out loud. 3 students filed independent accounts. The Academy's training room had continuous monitoring. The footage was reviewed. The board watched a Dravith combat instructor, certified, decorated, with 30 years of service, get systematically and efficiently neutralized by a human student who weighed perhaps a third of his body mass. The board watched her absorb 3 impacts that would have injured a Sulcan. The board watched her disassemble his offense in approximately 4 seconds. The Academy's xenobiology consultant was brought in. She pulled up Earth's file. She read the relevant sections aloud. She got to the part about evolutionary history, persistent megafaunal predator pressure, dietary omnivory, pain tolerance indices. She paused at that one, looked at the footage, looked back at the file, and said, "Yes. This is consistent." The board voted unanimously to revise the training curriculum. They also voted, quietly, to revise the protocols for uninvited physical demonstrations on students of Deathworld origin. Lyra Vera returned to class the following week. Instructor Veyron was there. He was professional. He was correct. He gave her a slightly wider berth than he gave the other students, which the other students noticed, and which Lyra did not comment on. Tef the Sulcan started sitting next to her at lunch. By the end of the semester, she had a small, unofficial cohort, students of 5 species who had decided that proximity to the human was statistically advantageous, possibly protective, and, more than anything else, deeply interesting. She didn't seem to mind. She was from Earth. She had grown up in a world that had tried, continuously and creatively, to kill every ancestor she had ever had. A few stares in a cafeteria were nothing. She had learned to calculate threat assessments before she could read. She had learned to hit back before she had learned to be afraid. She was 23 years old and she was a long, long way from the most dangerous thing she'd ever faced. And somewhere in the deep memory of her species, in the marrow of her bones, in the architecture of her nervous system, in the calm gray eyes that looked out at a galaxy full of species who had never once had to fight to earn their place in it, she carried the answer to a question the Academy had not thought to ask. What happens when the prey becomes the apex? Now they knew.